Legs, how you doing?
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Sounds like you've been pretty busy.
Yeah.
Now, when you decided to move to New York, the punk scene hadn't quite started yet. There was proto-punk stuff going on in Detroit and things like that. What brought you to New York?
Um, because it was a city that said yes to everything. It was no one wanted to live there, and it was all just outcasts, minorities, and weirdos and freaks. And it was the end of white flight.
Hmm.
So all the jerks had left the city. So it
Sure.
was kind of empty, and it was kind of it kind of looked like Dresden after the firestorm. I mean, it was burned out buildings on every block. It was just a wonderful movie set, you know,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
live out your fantasies.
And so you and your buddy John and Jed, you knew each other and said, let's all just kind of move out together. Hadn't quite formulated the magazine in your head yet. Was that something that you kind of came up with once you were there and kind of got a lay of the land and stuff and
Well,
what's
it
going?
really was John Holmstrom's magazine and his vision. Who's
Mhm.
I didn't see the magazine at all. I thought it was just going to be more homework, and I hated doing homework.
It was really cool. I was reading about how like even before it came out and you started kind of posting things that punk is coming just kind of around the city, which is pretty interesting, like ahead of its time as far as like a viral marketing ploy, get people wondering what it was before something actually had come out.
Yeah, that was cool. It was cold though. I didn't have gloves, and it was like November or something,
Yeah.
November, December, and we were putting them up on those lampposts with
Hmm.
you had to use wheat paste. You'd slap a poster up and then put it on the bottom of the lamp. It was perfect for the bottom of the lamppost, and that's where everybody looked anyway.
Hmm.
They didn't look up.
Very cool. And when you did that, was it throughout the city or did you kind of concentrate close to where you guys were like based?
No, where we were based was the punk dump on 30th and 10th Avenue, which was the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel.
Okay.
And the only people to reach up there were the transvestite hookers who blew the car johns waiting to get into the tunnel.
Mhm.
So no, we did them mostly downtown,
Right on. Yeah,
around CBGB's and on the Bowery.
sure.
You know.
So CBGB's was there, had opened up, or was it just kind of hadn't even opened up just
Oh
yet when?
no, it had opened and they were playing.
Okay.
But
Okay.
but when I came up with the title for punk, it was before we saw the Ramones or anybody.
Hmm.
The only people we were listening to were the Dictators
Got it.
back in Connecticut because we went home for the summer, to go
Mm-hmm.
swimming and shit.
Mm-hmm.
And Jed ran this painting business, and John came up from New York, and we were listening to Bob Dylan's "Blood on the Tracks," which was a great album. And he
Mm-hmm.
took it off and he put on the Dictators, and that
Blew your
kind of
mind.
spoke more to us than Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
even though that I still love that album and it's great.
But totally different energy, obviously.
They were
Yeah.
singing about how we were. They weren't singing about how we hoped to be or
Right.
failed love affairs. So we didn't have any love affairs.
Yeah. Just the grittiness of the reality of things as opposed to, yeah. And really kind of like a reflection of the city at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
How did you come to meet Arturo Vega?
Joey Ramone lived in it. He had a loft right around the corner from CBGB's,
Okay.
like right around the corner,
Like
on
literally, yeah.
Second Street. And that's where we all hung out, in between sets. And Arturo was just one of the most gracious. He was kind of like royalty in
Hmm.
the way he carried himself and the way his attitude. He was very regal. He was a
Hmm.
very special guy. He was also gay,
Hmm.
bisexual, because
Hmm.
I came, I slept over one night and there were three girls in his bed. I thought, You're lying about being a homo.
Yeah, I just blew your cover, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny because there's a couple really, really good interviews with him on YouTube that I watched.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, like you said, he would talk about the people would be coming in and out of the loft and how it was very central to a lot of people
It
hanging
was.
out.
Well, everybody at CBGB's knew it was his loft, and it was set up kind of like a after hours bar, sort of.
Hmm.
And it was also where all the Ramones, he did all the Ramones t-shirts. So he had a big silk screening operation going there.
Right. He
And
lived
Arturo,
there.
yeah, and Arturo and Joey lived there. Joey moved out for a time.
Okay.
I think he moved back.
But I remember because Arturo was saying in this interview, which it was posted like in 2008, but he'd been there for like decades. Same
Yeah.
spot.
I was there when the landlord offered him to sell him the building for 60 grand, which he should have.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. When was that?
Sometime in the 70s,
70s? Okay.
the 70s,
Yeah, it's funny because what
76, 77, around
he
then.
he had a story where he was saying he happened to be looking around and they were finishing building the units and stuff like that. And that's when he jumped into it. So he was like the first tenant or something like that for his loft.
When we first started hanging out there,
Hmm.
it was just kind of an empty loft with one bedroom in the corner and mattresses on the floor. And slowly he built a countertop for his kitchen and
Hmm.
private bedroom. But it was pretty open with
Mm.
except for all the tables with the silk screen operation going, you know.
How long were you in New York? Like, when did you end up leaving?
From 74 to about 2007.
So your first issue had Lou Reed on the cover.
Yeah.
Um, and was he just kind of around the scene too? And they said, "Hey, we've got this magazine.
No,
We'd love to."
the first night we went to see the Ramones,
Hmm.
um, Holmstrom was always in the Punk Dump, which was an abandoned auto parts store that we put the magazine out from.
Hmm.
And John was always listening to Metal Machine music. He thought it was the greatest punk record ever made, which,
Hmm.
as you know, is a double album of feedback. And
Hmm.
it drove me crazy. So, I loved Lou's earlier stuff. I loved the Velvets, and
Hmm.
I got to know them through John. John
Okay.
had his record collection ever,
Sure.
you know. So when we walked into CBGB's, I saw Lou Reed. I saw him sitting there and I said, "Hey, there's that guy you're always playing, you know." So we went up to him and I said, "We want to interview you for Punk Magazine." And John even said, "We'll put you on the cover." It's in the cartoon that John drew of and he goes, "Oh, your circulation must be fabulous."
Hmm.
He really had that deadpan humor down.
Hmm. Hmm. Funny. Very funny. And had you guys kind of kept in touch with him since that time, or he was
John
just
did.
around?
Lou hated me. I was an asshole. I was a drunken 19-year-old kid trying to pick up girls,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know. And here's Lou sitting with Rachel,
Uh-huh.
you know, a trans, I don't know, a trans. Um, so I mean, he was always talking to Holmstrom about art and what he should be doing with the magazine.
Like that's really where they connected was visual stuff. Did Arturo ever do anything for the magazine? Visually?
Yeah, I think he was in some Fumettis, Yeah, we were always art directing, like the first
Sure.
Ramones cover
Uh-huh.
Roberta Bailey shot was a photo session for Punk Magazine. And me and Holmstrom and Arturo
Hmm.
kind of, were the art, saying, if you notice, I said, Tommy, stand on your tiptoe. We wanted to get an even line, as even a line as we could.
Hmm.
And Tommy was really short
Short.
and Joey was very, very tall. So it
Totally.
was Joey's slunched, kind of hunched over, and Tommy's standing on his tiptoes in
Uh-huh.
shots, you know.
Very funny. Yeah, because like you said, Joey was so tall. Either you get everybody in the shot, cut him off at the neck, or
Yeah,
so just
yeah, exactly. So,
yeah,
so
funny. And had you also met John Cale as well? Because they were both around, or
I didn't get to know he was around, yeah. But
okay, but
he was usually at CBGB's with Nico when Nico was playing or he was playing.
sure.
And I was usually getting drunk, so I wasn't paying that much attention.
Right, like
There
it's
was so
just you're
much
just
going on.
yeah, I was just gonna say it, like you're just in the scene. I mean, it's like and at the time you're not thinking like, oh, I gotta reach out to this person, I gotta talk to this person or whatever. You're just doing your thing.
I would have loved to have interviewed John Cale though.
I heard a
He
funny
has, you should read his book by Victor Bachris. It's the best book that Victor ever did. It's called What is What is Welsh for Zen
that's his book. What is Welsh for Zen?
by John Cale. It's fantastic,
Cool.
you know.
Tell me a little bit about it. Like what is he
Oh, he goes all through the history of the Velvets,
awesome.
and it's written in his voice, and it's kind of an amazing,
Document of
yeah, that time.
sure. Right, because it goes even beyond like just the characters, but the scene and really kind of
Well,
encapsulate.
he really describes Lou well. If you
Okay.
want to get a definition of what Lou was like, read this book.
Mm-hmm. Pretty complicated guy.
Pretty fucked up guy.
So, I heard this story I wanted to ask you about. It's about Debbie Harry. She's the only person who had a car, and she fixed her car, no mechanic needed. That's about all I was given. What's that story about?
Well, she used to give us rides home to the Punk Dump from
Okay.
CBG, in the early days. And she drove down to Wilmington, Delaware, when Holmstrom and I were the guest stars at the first national, international sleaze convention and held in Wilmington, Delaware. Yeah. So we were guest hosts. And
And did you just get to know them as well because they were just another band hanging out,
well,
CBGB, and then
John, I believe,
uh-huh.
had gone to School of Visual Arts and kind of knew Chris Stein a bit. Not
Okay,
really good friends,
sure.
but they became very, Debbie was always around, and Debbie and Chris were kind of like, you know, big fans of the magazine, and we were always hanging out with them. Well, we did a lot of early shoots with Debbie.
Okay.
She's in Detroit. Chris Stein shot with the shootout where Anya gets shot in the
Hmm.
tit, and
Hmm.
Debbie gets shot. I don't know where Debbie gets shot.
How did you come to meet Ginger Coyote?
I don't remember. I don't have the slightest idea. Somewhere, sometime. But I met a lot of people in LA when I was drunk.
Because she said you had interviewed her about there was a situation in San Francisco, a club called Mabuhay Gardens,
Right.
and
That sounds familiar. Yeah, I just
yes,
interviewed her about the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez,
yes. So
hanging
tell
out.
me about this because she didn't really go into it, but she said you had interviewed her about the and yeah, what was that all about?
It's a great story, and I'm going to wait until I publish it.
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
cool, but yeah, because you
and it's called the Night Stalker tried to become a punk rocker.
interesting. Yeah, because he like terrorized the West Coast,
Oh, I
basically. Like,
know, I know, I know, I know he did. I know. I've
yeah,
read everything about him. Yeah.
sure. Now, you guys kind of had your own version, like in the mid '70s, with like the Summer of Sam.
I was in my first detox during
Okay,
most, and,
okay,
and nobody at CBGB's was worried about getting shot.
okay. Yeah, I was curious about that because, like, if you look
No,
back at things now, they like
no, because
totally.
it was shooting people in Brooklyn and Queens. It was shooting. No, it was just that we knew no, it wasn't going to come to the Bowery.
Yeah,
I mean, no one came to the Bowery.
yeah.
You
Talk
know,
about a safe zone. Yeah, you could just
the
do your
cops
thing.
didn't even come to the Bowery.
Hmm.
Just meant more paperwork.
Hey everybody, this is Greg. I'm just kind of breaking in here because at this point in the interview, Legs and I were talking about true crime stuff, and I completely forgot to ask him a question that I wanted to know. Um, there's a story that's going around that one night, I don't know if it was at CBGB's or if it was at Max's, but Debbie Harry hitched a ride with somebody. They were taking her home and she was feeling kind of strange. And so she said, "Hey, can you let me out here?" Got out a little bit early, so they didn't know exactly where she needed to go. And she got home, everything was fine. But came to find out later, she got real lucky that night because the person who picked her up, the stranger, was Ted Bundy. And a lot of people have tried to debunk it, say, "Nah, that's just a rumor, it's going around." So I thought I'd ask Legs, and then I completely forgot to ask him. So I emailed him, and he got back to me and said, "Yes, the story is actually true." So crazy stuff. I just didn't want to leave that one out. All right, back to the interview.
I slept on Keith Morris's floor one night.
Did you?
Yeah, he had to remind me. I was like, really?
Hey, yeah, I'm that guy. I'm the guy you slept on my floor. Something like that. Oh yeah.
Well, I remember we went to this party and it
Okay.
was this three-story house in LA.
Mhm.
It was a big party and the cops came and raided it. And I don't know if it was Keith, but it was somebody. I said, let's go up onto the roof because they won't catch us on the roof because you
Mhm.
could climb right up onto the roof from the stairway, from
Yeah.
and so we hid on the top of the roof and continued drinking beers, watching everyone get arrested.
Sound like maybe it was up in the Hollywood Hills or something.
I don't know where it was. I
Sure.
could, I could never find it again in a million.
And like so every once in a while you'd kind of like head out west to LA and stuff like that and
Well, I came out ostensibly to do an interview with Hugh Hefner, which
got it.
never came through. And that's when the Sex Pistols happened.
Sure.
And Holmstrom and Roberta were on the entire Sex Pistols tour. And I was hanging with the Ramones.
Hmm.
And the Ramones hated the Sex Pistols, hated them, and I said, I gotta go to San Francisco to see them. And it was like, Joey was saying, oh, Lex is hanging out with his new best friends, the Sex Pistols.
Uh-huh.
It was like high school.
Right,
No,
right, of course, right, right.
you know,
But I remember there was a thing about where Malcolm McLaren happened to see Richard Hell and liked his whole aesthetic and then took that and kind of made the Sex Pistols look based around that.
yeah, that's from Please Kill Me.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Which was something that Richard Hell had written on his shirt as a statement.
Oh, no, yeah, he did, but he said he never wore it. He used to
Okay.
make Richard Lloyd wear it. There was
Hmm.
a lot of people downtown New York City. On a Friday or Saturday night, the corner of West Broadway and Houston was deserted.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now it's all models.
What were your impressions? Did you of Hilly Crystal? What did you think of him?
I thought he didn't know what he was doing, and I
Okay.
thought he was a great guy for for letting it happen. He really was a nice guy. You know,
Okay.
he really was a very decent guy, even though he was friends with the Hells Angels and stuff. He never treated me badly. He never, one night Merv, they had this big bouncer, Merv, who wore a yellow hard hat on. And I remember he had me under his arm because I was so skinny, and he was just walking me. I guess he picked me up off the floor or something.
Uh-huh.
And he was just carrying me under his arm, but he was stopping to talk to people while he was carrying, I go, got a cigarette? You know, those,
Yeah.
but he was a nice guy. He was the nicest guy too.
Hmm.
He never fought with anyone. He just he just picked you up, and. It was
But
very, 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 very nice. Well, like he hated the Ramones when he first heard them. But he gave everybody a chance.
sure. Uh-huh.
Yeah. he said to the Ramones, nobody's gonna like you, but I'll have you back, which
Right
I mean,
on.
who else would do that?
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
pretty fucking generous.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, because at the end of the day, he probably wants to make money too. So he'd think like, well, if I don't like them, maybe I'll put somebody else I could bring in or whatever until they started kind of catching on and taking on
I don't think he was doing it for the money. I think he was doing it for the freedom.
just to do
'Cause there
something.
weren't any clubs for original bands to
Uh-huh.
play their own music.
Hmm.
There was only Max's and CBGB's.
Right. So what would you say were the differences between the two? Because it seemed like a lot of bands would kind of play one and then the other, Max's and CBGB's. Like,
Well, you had to have money at Max's.
okay.
And at CBGB's, I got him free from Max's too. But there were more people who would buy me beers at CBGB's than there was at Max's. There was the same bands,
Hmm.
same crowds.
Right on.
Yeah.
And you said after all that, and you went to work for Spin Magazine for 10 years, on and off, roughly.
Yeah.
Um,
I was freelance. And
okay.
when I stopped drinking, I,
Hmm.
I got promoted to be a senior editor.
And you had said before too, like you were even less interested in writing about music as opposed to being like investigative about other things going on.
I hated writing about music. It
Okay.
was so boring. It was so boring.
Hmm.
I mean, when they sent me to interview Gene Loves Jezebel in Arizona, I hired two 16-year-old girls to do the interview and I got drunk.
Right. Funny. So yeah, like at that point,
I mean, who wants to write about fucking Gene Loves Jezebel? You know?
yeah, yeah. Now, is it a matter of just that the that style had come into play and you just weren't into it, as opposed to like, well, in your mind, things were just so much cooler on the East Coast in the mid '70s. I'd rather be just deal if I could, I'd be dealing with that. But here
Yeah,
we
but
are,
they wouldn't write about the Ramones
mhm,
or Dead
who were
Boy.
obviously still around doing
Yeah,
their thing.
or Suicide or any of the great.
Yeah,
Now all these people are legends and iconic.
totally.
But at the time, no one wanted them.
You brought up suicide. I remember the night when Alan Vega died. Henry Rollins, he has this radio show in LA, and he did a bit on him, and that's really when I started kind of getting into them and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And there's some really funny interviews with Alan Vega on YouTube and stuff like that. How they were so different than everybody else going on. How did you just happen to see them one night and then just kind of got to know them, or
Yeah, I mean, I think I did a fumetti with them where
a
they
film?
didn't they were from another planet. They spoke, googly god symbol.
Mm-hmm.
They spoke symbols and music, symbol. They didn't speak and in the end they ended up committing suicide by shooting too much heroin or something,
Uh-huh.
you know.
And it's funny because like to hear Alan describe their shows, like they were pretty nuts. And he said because he wasn't used to people really being into it until at one point, they were playing in this one club and the lights went on and he could see people were kind of grooving to it and he's like, well, that's not what we're used to. What's
Yeah,
going on here?
yeah. Well, they
But
were scary to watch. You thought Alan was serious. He'd
uh-huh.
swing in the microphone, would be almost hitting everybody in the first row.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he was great.
Yeah.
He was a great guy too.
He seemed like it. He was like a real character.
I love the rhythm.
Hmm.
I love the melodies.
Hmm.
Ghost Rider
Yeah.
motorcycle. It's great.
They got embraced by that scene too. People liked them, the different bands and stuff
It
like
took
that.
them a while, but they
Uh-huh.
did. They did.
Uh-huh.
And they ended up opening for Chrissy Hynde and shit.
Wow. Yeah.
They did pretty good.
You at times had talked about like probably in the late 60s and the 70s, the sound of like MC5 and stuff like that, really this proto punk. You were really, really into that. Did you ever get to know those guys?
I got to know Ronnie and Scotty Ashton and Wayne Kramer,
Okay,
people from the MC5 and
sure.
John Sinclair. I had to go all over the country to interview these guys.
Now you've got a movie out, just hit Tubi. Tell me a little bit about that.
It's called Pusher Man, Frank
Okay.
Lucas and the True Story of American Gangster.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been friends with Mark Jacobson, who wrote the original story, The Return of Superfly, for New York Magazine, which they turned into American Gangster, starring Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe.
Mm-hmm.
So I I had I'd been friends with Mark. He came to the Punk magazine office in '76 and he did an article on us. And we just stayed friends, when we'd have dinner, once or twice or three times a year. We'd run into each other. What are you doing? I'm doing this. I'm doing this for Spin. He was working for National Geographic and
Mm-hmm.
Esquire, New York Magazine, and I always loved Mark's writing,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't until recently that I read and he told me about Frank Lucas and he was working on it and all the machinations that went with getting the movie made and all that. So I um I was aware of him working with Frank Lucas
Uh-huh.
and them making this movie,
Mm-hmm.
but I had never read the original, which for some reason, I don't know, I didn't get the New York Magazine. So I guess it wasn't until he reprinted it and I was in a bookstore last year
Uh-huh.
uh, up in Massachusetts. And I bought the book and I read it and I said, this would make a great fucking movie, Mark.
Totally.
So Mark agreed to do it with me and he got me Richie Roberts, who was the policeman turned federal prosecutor who prosecuted Frank Lucas. And Russell Crowe plays him in the movie.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So that, and I got Fab Five Freddy and Darius James and crime writer Michael Daly.
Right on.
So, so that, and we just told the story, and it's very, very, it's for the subject matter, it's pretty amusing,
Where can people see? They can see it on Tubi, you're saying?
and they can purchase it
Okay.
from MVD Entertainment Group.
Do
You know,
do you have a site people can also go to?
I do. I have a site. I haven't posted on it because I've been so busy.
Sure.
Called Legsville.
Legsville.com.
Legsville.com. Yeah.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
Just go watch Pusher Man. You'll like it. To Ginger Coyote and Punk Globe, a very happy and merry 48th birthday.
Thank you. Been really nice talking to you, Legs.
Nice talking to you, Glenn.
Take it easy.
All right. Bye bye.